Fuji's firmware version 4 is the latest of a barrage of incremental improvements sent out via firmware updates for all the X series cameras. The XT-1 is the latest to get the treatment. We're going to have a look inside it and see if it's any good. Hi, my name is Matt Widgery from mattwidgery.com. So I'm going to be looking today at the firmware update version 4 for the Fuji XT-1, which promises not just tweaks and incremental changes to the autofocus system as well as some other changes, but promises a new autofocus system for your Fuji XT-1. Can I just say off the bat before we get on to whether or not I think the system's any good or not, or the upgrades are any good or not, that one of the things that I love about Fuji cameras just so much, and what sets them apart in my opinion from any other camera manufacturer that's currently making cameras, is this commitment to adding new features to their cameras after they've already gone on sale. So, you know, in the case of the XT-1, we've had some genuinely useful things. Electronic shutter has been built into it, and now we've got these wide focus and new tracking modes that we'll come onto here. But I think that's a jolly good thing, and I would just have a word out there to all of the other manufacturers, if any of them are watching, and say, why can't you do it? Canon, Nikon, Pentax, Sony, Olympus, why can't you all do this? You're all perfectly capable of doing it. So much stuff can be done these days with a firmware update and actually keep the hardware the same, rather than selling us a whole new camera every year. That's by the by though. What we're looking at today is the new update. I'm going to go through the features and we can figure out if it's genuinely useful improvements or if they're just tinkering and it's just a way to get some good publicity, or if they're fixing things that maybe they should have got right in the first place. So let's have a little look, shall we? If we go to the, this is the blurb from the Fuji website, so let's have a look. So the new AF system, it says. So the new AF system with zone and wide tracking modes for effortless capture of moving subjects. So what it says here is the AF system complements the fast and accurate 49-point single autofocus system with new zone and wide tracking modes, which use 77 autofocus points across a wider area to substantially improve the camera's ability to capture moving subjects. So, as we know, with the XT-1, it has an incredible burst rate of 8 frames per second. So theoretically, that means it should be good for shooting sports and things like that. But what you've got to get right is how accurately and quickly the autofocus system is capable of tracking that subject. It's all very well and good if you've got a runner going across your frame like that. You can get 8 frames a second, but if only the first one's in focus, it's not terribly useful. So what they're doing here is using some new technology in there to take advantage of the phase detect pixels that are in the middle of that sensor block, which you can configure in different blocks. There's a zone mode which will allow you to do a 3x3 block, a 5x3 block, or a 5x7 block from the total 77 autofocus, 77 points of autofocus area. And when you combine this with the continuous autofocus mode, the camera will continue to track the focus in the middle of that square where you put it. I gave this a bit of a go, and I was just tracking my chicken as she ran across the garden. It did seem to do a pretty good job. I also did some tests, sort of macro with my hand, just moving my hand across. And again, it did seem to do a pretty good job of tracking those points. However, what I did find is it's great if you remember to switch it back onto single point focus for doing still shots, but if you leave it in this mode, every time you press the shutter, even without recomposing and without anything else moving in the frame, it did tend to kind of reselect different points each time. It reread the scene differently, it seemed to me. So if I was wanting to take a picture of the camera that's recording me now, and I pressed it the first time with the camera lens as I look at it in the middle of the autofocus points, it might hit that one time, it might hit halfway down the tripod the next time, it might hit the bookshelf behind it the time after that. So it did seem to do a really good job at tracking, but it's not something that I would recommend using in stills. When you've got still subjects, simply because it does seem to kind of like have a little bit of a tantrum. It doesn't know what to do if it can't detect any movement in that picture. So that's something to be aware of, but I did find it really accurate. The next thing it's got, and I have to say I haven't tested this yet, I will update you when I've had a portrait client in here that I can actually do this with, but it's got eye detect autofocus. So this is an update which provides not just face detection, which it's had before, but eye detection, so that it looks at a person and figures out where the eye is and puts the focus onto that eye. Not only that, but theoretically, if you have the person facing with one leading eye towards the camera and one eye away from the camera, then it will work out which is the leading eye and will focus on that. This would seem to me very brilliant and a jolly good idea, and would, it says here, allow you to easily focus on the eyes even in difficult situations, and shooting wide open. If you're using the 56 1.2, for example, where that depth of field is very, very shallow, having that being able to lock onto the eye, if it works well, will be brilliant. I will test that and come back to you on that one. Next is autofocus improvement in the movie mode. Now this I did notice was actually just incredible. I was very impressed by this. I was already, because my video camera that I was using before to make these YouTube videos with was the Nikon D5100. And the continuous autofocus in video on that was appalling. I mean, it really was shit. It didn't do anything at all apart from hunt in and out, and it was absolutely rubbish. You could only ever leave it in manual focus mode if you're going to do video. You just couldn't get it to continuously autofocus. The X Pro 1 was also dreadful for doing continuous autofocus in movie mode. It just didn't really hunt, because it hunted so much because it was contrast detect only. I was super impressed before Firmware 4 came out in the XT-1's ability to lock onto the thing that I wanted it to and then pull focus relatively smoothly to the next thing. But since the firmware update has come out, it just does seem to pull a little smoother. It's a little bit more gentle. It doesn't kind of like it doesn't sort of hunt in and out. When you're doing stills photography and you've got continuous autofocus on, you know, the transition from one frame to the next can be as sharp or as jumpy as you want because it's just still images. With movie, it's much more important to feather that focus in and follow the focus through really gently from one to the other to get a nice, pleasing look to the eye, so that if you focus on something in the foreground and have the camera then pull focus to something that's further away or vice versa, it pulls you in and out nice and gently and doesn't make you feel like you're having some sort of epileptic fit. And I did find that it did a jolly good job on that, and I was very, very impressed. Other improvements that they've got on here, they've improved the shutter dial operation, and now when the shutter dial is set to T and the shutter type is set to mechanical and electronic, because you've got the mechanical shutter and the electronic shutter in these cameras now since the last firmware update, you can now, just using the command dial on the back there, just that one there, you can now set the full range of exposure times from 30 seconds to 1/32,000th of a second, whereas it was limited before. You'll have to look up what it was limited before, but you couldn't get that full range in at any rate. Now you can. So you can effectively, if you want to, rather than using the shutter speed dial at the top there, you can simply have the, you can simply put it into T at that point, and then you can use this rear command dial as your shutter dial, a little bit like an SLR. I used to have that set up on my Nikons. It did the shutter speed like that, so you can do that. How useful that would be, I don't know. I haven't really tried it. I kind of like using the old school dial at the top there, frankly, mainly because I like to be able to look down and see at a glance where my shutter speed is. So when the thing is around my neck, I can look down, okay, I'm on 500th of a second, you know, I will change that down to 60th for this next shot, and I can do it before I brought the camera up to my eye, which I really like, but some people, they like to have the camera up to their eye and then, you know, be using the dial on the back there. This gives you that option. I'm agnostic, frankly. I don't really mind which way or the other, but I will try that and let you know in the future if it's something I want to carry on using, but personally I don't think I will. It's by the by, they've done it, it's an option there for you. Exposure compensation in manual mode. Now this is cool. Again, what you've got on, and it was a bit of a gripe, I think, with some people that used the XT-1 when it first came out. I think generally the consensus was that this ISO button, although it was lovely to have the ISO button there, it was a bit of a pain in the arse to have to press down that center unlock dial button in the middle of the dial. I've kind of got used to it now. It bugged me for about 10 and a half seconds, and then I kind of got used to it. And now I'm so used to it, I really don't care that very much. But I don't know. I think this is one of the features that I might use. Basically what they've done is they've allowed you, when you've got the camera in full manual mode, to still have like effectively an exposure compensation using just ISO on the exposure compensation dial. So you've got 3 stops over and 3 stops under. So you've got a 6-stop range of ISO that you can play with whilst in manual exposure, that you can use just with this wheel, this exposure compensation wheel, which is definitely more ergonomic than the ISO wheel that you do have to do that with. Again, you can't just look down at a pinch and see, you know, what the ISO is. But for me, that's less critical. Like the difference between 500th of a second and 60th of a second is the difference between motion blur and not motion blur in your picture. So I'd much rather be really, you know, sure about where I am. Frankly, the ISO is so good and so noise-free with this camera that I don't really care if it's in 400 or 1600. Doesn't bother me because I know that the end result is going to be good. So that's something where I would just be pretty happy to actually have, maybe I'd leave the camera in something like 800 ISO and then, you know, just use the command dial up and down to sort of make fine adjustments. I actually think that's really nice. Then there's another couple of things which, you know, haven't really noticed any difference with, frankly. You've got finer lines on the framing grid, which enhances visibility. Well, I don't know. I could see perfectly well through the framing lines before, frankly. It wasn't such a big issue for me. And the last thing that they've changed, which kind of, it did confuse some people, I think. There was a mode on there called silent mode, which kind of, all it did was it turned the sound off, but it also turned the flash off as well. I don't know why it turns the flash off. Why you would want silent mode and no flash, I don't know. But anyway, they've changed the name of it to silent mode, from silent mode to sound and flash off, just to confuse the people out there that were maybe a little simple and didn't work that out. Actually, no, in fairness, it is, because if nobody tells you, it is a bit of a pain in the arse if you've got silent mode switched on, so i.e. it is a silent camera, but then you put a flash on there and the flash doesn't work, and you think, what have I done? Is the flash broken? So there was a pain in the arse, actually. I'm being slightly facetious saying it's for simple people, because it actually confused me as well. I am fairly simple, it's true, but nevertheless, let's give Fuji credit for actually putting a more sensible name on there, because at least now if you're scrolling through the menu and you're trying to work out why your flash doesn't fire, and there's a button on there which is activated which says sound and flash off, you can go, aha, I wonder if that's the root of the problem. So, in summation, there are some brilliant new features in here, some of which are genuinely really helpful. I absolutely love the new movie recording mode, and I do think generally also they've made the autofocus system just more snappy, as well as having these new zone modes for continuous autofocusing and shooting moving subjects, all of which just build up to make the camera more accomplished than it was before. And that, as Fuji are brilliant at doing, but it's another example of them doing a wonderful job on that, and yeah, it's wonderful. A couple of little side notes. I did actually get forwarded an interesting email with a link to one of the Fuji Rumours articles, which was actually sent by a show viewer and friend of mine, Sergio. He pointed out that there were a lot of people that were complaining about whether or not these various autofocus modes were as good as they could be, and some people were actually reporting that they weren't finding a huge amount of difference between getting the upgrade done and not. And this article on Fuji Rumours, which I'll link to on YouTube, I'll put it in the notes underneath here, actually points out some tips in order to get the best out of the firmware upgrade, and they're very useful to go. One of the main things that it suggests that you do is keep the pre-focus on and also the high performance mode on. That will ensure that you get the snappiest autofocus possible, the most accurate autofocus possible, and will generally make the camera more responsive. What the high performance mode does effectively is almost overclock the processor. It makes it speeds it up. It's not really overclocking, it's just getting the most out of it, really. When the sort of battery saving mode in, it just dials down that performance a little bit. So if you're not finding a huge amount of difference, you know, put that high performance mode on and you will. However, the caveat, as always, with all of these Fuji cameras is that already the battery life is average, I would say, for a mirrorless camera, terrible compared to almost any DSLR in the last 15 years. Therefore, when you put high performance mode on, and that will give you a decrease in shot number of about 20%, so a big number, you will need to carry extra batteries with these cameras. And in fact, my recommendation for anybody that has a Fuji X series camera is that they go and buy at least 2 more batteries and keep them in their pocket. The batteries are small and they are cheap. You can buy these little things, you know, they're all, I won't mention the brand name of these, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, X Pro, I don't know if they, I'm not reviewing this and telling you to buy this one. It's a generic battery that, you know, you can buy off-brand. They work perfectly well. There's a ton of them on eBay. I've never had any problem with any off-brand battery not working very well. They seem to work incredibly well. And you can even get some which have got a slightly higher capacity than the Fujifilm originals. And, you know, what are they, a $5 each, something like that? So get a couple and stick them in your pocket. Because look, they're tiny. They're the size of a matchbox. Keep them in your bag, keep them in your pocket. And then when the camera inevitably conks out of battery after just a couple of 100 shots, your shoot hasn't been called to a halt prematurely and you can just grab another one out of your bag. I would really, really recommend that, regardless of whether or not you put them in the high performance modes or the pre-focus modes or anything like that, but especially if you're doing that. And why not get the most out of your camera? Get all the Fuji. If you haven't done this already, get the update because it's better. Put your camera in high performance mode, put your camera in pre-focus, get it all set up. Look at the tips in this article on FujiRumors.com that will give you a list, I think there's 10 or something, different tips that you can do to get the best out of that upgrade. And that will help you tune your camera up and make the most of it because, you know, you've bought and paid for it, you might as well. So that's it. Thanks very much for watching. As always, please subscribe to the channel and I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.